to be with you during this session on cyber crisis management. How should we organize at a national and international level? My name is Bernadette. I am the editor-in-chief of a magazine on cybersecurity, and I have had the pleasure to share previous conferences with you on the subject of cyber security. We're going to go back to this question of crisis management. We have more and more sophisticated cyber attacks that are targeting specific organizations and can affect entire sectors, if not states. It is up to the states to set up tools to anticipate these crises, and when it does come about, to also have the means to respond to the crisis. And resilience as well, which is the stage thereafter. They have to think about that as well. We'll be talking about that. We'll be talking about the connection between all of this, and what about the model for France. We'll also be talking about Luxembourg. Pascal will be addressing that, and also international and European cooperation, which is absolutely essential. And this is the very subject of the FIC 2021. To better understand the matter at hand, we have Pascal Station. You are the CEO of Security Made in Luxembourg. Thanks for being here. We have Saad Kadi, who's the head of CERT EU. Thank you, Saad, for being here. We have Mathieu Couturier, who's the head of Cyber Crisis Management Unit of the Ansi. That needs no introductions. Thank you, Mathieu. And we have General Eric de Montenot. General de Montenot, you are the deputy to the Cyber Defense Commander. Thank you very much. And General Eric Fressinet, who is second in command of the ComCybergent, which is the new structure of the gendarmerie in cyberspace. Before going into the heart of the matter, let us go back to the threats and in order to better understand why we have changed our way of facing crises, or perhaps this modus operandi needs a redesign. What about these threats, the type of threats? Because we have a cyber crisis, and then we have other types of crises as well, which is an important thing to take into account. Thank you, Mélanie, and thank you for organizing this roundtable. And hopefully we're going to have some good exchanges. I'm not going to draw up a whole list of the threats that we are facing today, but what type of crises are we facing in which there is a cyber dimension? There's a variety. For instance, we have the epidemic crisis, and we also have the social crisis, where there's more and more of a cyber element, and it's a continuous worry to us. It's important for us to provide a solution in the digital space, close to the people who are dealing with the crisis and adjusting to developments in the crisis. We have simple intelligence, like the collective information disseminated on social media with respect to certain events. For instance, the attacks and the decapitation, beheading of Samuel Paty, and there was a lot of information on social media, and it was important to understand this area, to really understand what was happening with respect to the reaction of the public and any possible abuse of social media by certain groups to create turbulence among the population. And then at the other end, we have purely cyber crises, and we have those that involve us directly, because we can be a victim, just like any small or medium-sized organization. We can be the victim of a cyber attack. We have to be prepared for such an event, and our plan has to take account of that. If it is an IT attack against the gendarmerie, for instance, we have to take that into account as well. And then more significant crises, or at any rate more systemic global crises, the publication of vulnerabilities that are used, that might require crisis response unit to gauge the impact and perhaps flank the victims that might ensue from this crisis. And then we also have, well, we're going to just listen to Mathieu Couturier on these crises. You have what Eric Fressinet was saying, the general was saying, the different types of crises, and then the threats that are ever changing, which makes one have to rethink one's crisis management model, because this cybercrime environment is relentless and constantly changing. Thank you for your question, and thank you for organizing this roundtable as well. As you're all aware, cybercrime is one of the main cyber threats to companies, local authorities, health institutions. We've had a lot of examples over the past few months with proliferation of crises. So we have a change in the way we position ourselves now, because in a cyber crisis you have immediate, direct, destabilizing, even violent effects, and recovering from this type of crisis takes months. And then we have a threat that will adjust and react to the response of the attacked organizations. So another aspect that is very significant, we have information systems that don't know any boundaries. There's huge interconnection amongst them. We have supply chains, subcontracting chains, and these are also things to be taken into account when you're dealing with a cyber crisis. And of course, this also is part of the indirect impacts of a crisis. Trust, one's reputation. When you've had a cyber attack, what about the faith that your partners and customers have in you? So organizations have to change their tack when it comes to management of these crises, and to see to it that there's a technical, tactical, strategic cooperation, and also an operational level, and public and private enterprises have crisis regimes. And another thing that's important is to surround yourself with a number of experts. No person can deal and solve a crisis alone. So it's important to surround oneself, to mobilize experts, to anticipate with them, to practice with them. We talked about practice exercises today, but that's absolutely vital when you're talking about cyber threats and preparing for a cyber attack. So you talked about these practice exercises and surrounding oneself with experts. Pascal will also be talking to us about what is being done in Luxembourg and also in the training and recruitment part in France, because we know that cyber attacks are not all things cyber are not only about technology, but also about humans. Eric was talking about the different cyber crises that have shown some shortcomings in crisis management and at any rate shown to what degree one needs to be more vigilant. There's a very sophisticated crisis, SolarWinds, that obliges the whole of the ecosystem to ask itself questions and why this system of crisis management has to be revisited, reinvented. Thank you very much, Melanie, for having invited me to this roundtable. Just to mention this solar wind crisis, that from the point of view of CERT EU, because it's assumed that we're the CERT body for the whole of the EU. We are the certification of all institutions, agencies, of bodies of the European Union, the Commission, Council, the Parliament. We have 80 organizations that we defend that works in all types of sectors, gender equality, finance, agriculture. We were the first, we have we also experienced the attack on the EMA while they were assessing vaccines. A lot of you have had the vaccines because I see a lot of 5G chips in your arms. Well, the CERT EU thinks that it is the most sophisticated crisis that we've had since we were created 10 years ago, SolarWinds. And I was very surprised about the way that the EU and Europe, more largely, was not really aware of what it represented and how it changed the things altogether. We've had WannaCry, etc., and people were saying, never again, we're going to set up mechanisms. And yes, they do exist at a European level, EU level, that we can go back to. Mathieu mentioned the different layers there are within the European Union, but by and large, we've had quite a few victims on our side in the European Union as well. But really, it must make us realize that we're not ready. There are a lot of mechanisms that are, but there's a lack of intertwining among the different mechanisms. We've had some nice initiatives. The Commission has just announced one such mechanism in their cybersecurity communication that will help in the long run, that are not there yet. But these are very professional attackers indeed, that know more about the systems than the suppliers themselves. SolarWinds might have had a bigger scope if it wasn't a group of cyber espionage behind this attack, and there was more than 18,000 victims, and they have limited resources to sort among these victims. But imagine if this had been ransomware, or not a state player, but another type of gang. And we can go back on the attack on the VSA. We really had a lucky escape once again. So yes, you're sounding the alarm on what threats we actually face and the need to jointly rethink the existing models. Perhaps we might talk about what the CyBER at the Ministry for the Armed Forces does, and present to the public what France is doing on all fronts to try and counter these cyber threats that are increasing.
Ce que je représente.
Thanks. I represent the T responsible for cyber defense of means that pertain to weapon systems, information systems that are operated by our military in France and elsewhere. In terms of military cyber defense, well, we act in our own scope, but there is a primus inter pares in French bodies that are in charge of cyber defense. It's the Ansi. We work closely with them, and we're talking about governance, and we'll probably draw on that topic later on. But I penetrated the world of cyber defense 2 years ago, and I believe that the French model has been well thought through and has shown its effectiveness through different crises. We have interministerial governance of cyber defense that is articulated around an organism that has been shown in the C4, the Center for Coordination of Defense, as well as hand in hand with all the other stakeholders that have something to bring to the table in terms of cyber defense, specifically internal and external intelligence entities. The ComCyber, in its own scope, is rather vigilant on a number of attacks that could target the military. We are most concerned by IT systems and weapon systems, whether they be radars, tanks, ships. Well, they are increasingly connected and digitalized, but they're also increasingly vulnerable to cyber attacks. So we are afraid that opponents could take control of these systems and crash our planes or shut down the engines of our ships. We also fear that the enemy could break through our defenses to steal intelligence and have a better view of our intentions. We also fear manipulation of intelligence. Another kind of cyber attack is to modify the perception of a user of its own information system. So you could modify the image that an airspace controller has in front of him in order to have an advantage. But we could also look at the way terrorists circulate their propaganda on our own territories. So we have been in the Sahel and in the Near East for a number of years, and we have to be able to foil adversary propaganda on social networks, and we have to do it effectively. There's also a number of stakeholders that seek to undermine our actions via cyber networks. So all these items can constitute a cyber crisis. And these crises are often not public. If you uncover a virus on a weapon system, we're not going to shout it out loud. And if we're able to foil enemy propaganda, we're not going to say it in the public forum. So you also talked about SolarWinds. If we had a French SolarWinds, well, we'd be impacted also because we use IT systems that are tied in with government systems or also corporations. We are part and parcel of a number of civil IT systems. In that spirit, we want our main weapon systems and information system provider to focus on cybersecurity. Our minister has signed a convention with our 8 main suppliers, and we're helping them and their own suppliers to do more cybersecurity by design. From the onset of the conception of a weapon system, the state has agreed to support cybersecurity by design. Thank you. You're talking about concerns for a number of attacks, so I understand that you're seeking to anticipate a number of items in terms of your internal cybersecurity approach. If a crisis hits, what are you going to leverage? So, some technologies, but what's the human resource pillar that you will leverage? What kind of cyber fighters do you have? I know that you have invested a lot in this approach. What can you tell us? Indeed, this is a part of our approach. We want to anticipate the attack. We're currently growing rapidly. It's one of the main unit that is being strengthened. We're going to hire many more cyber fighters in the years to come, and we have been hiring them in the past years. So we want to better detect and anticipate the attacks, but also to respond to them. Human resources. Well, we often tell our MPs that the cyber is cheap. It doesn't cost much. If you look at what cyber defense tools cost, well, they cost 1.7 billion, whereas the whole budget of the military is 300 billion. Cyber tools cost nothing compared to an aircraft carrier. So that's what we tell our MPs. So if we're able to get the funding for these human resources, and if we're able to make them loyal to us, we'll be able to monitor our weapon systems. We'll have to deploy human resources to monitor our weapon systems via security operating centers. I was talking also about IT attacks. We have to monitor social networks, because the sun never sets on French interests. And we have to be able to detect any kind of attack. So we have to hire also linguists, geopoliticians, psychologists. These people are also cyber fighters. Eric, I saw you raise an eyebrow at what the general said. What does the Comme Cyber is doing? Does it use the same motto? Does it say to the MPs that cyber is cheap? So, more seriously, how will you integrate this cyber dimension in the gendarmerie? Gendarmerie is the French military police. So how are you going to think this on the local level? Because you have to protect the French territory. So 1.7 billion for the military. That would be a significant investment for the gendarmerie, because the whole budget of the gendarmerie is 9 billion euros. So on the technical level, we have IT solutions. We have smart solutions. We develop a number of solutions. We work with open source software. We have partnerships of European projects that allow us to go forward and innovate without necessarily consuming the state's budget. We have to invest in human resources. We regularly talk about this with the military. We're looking for the same profiles. We have former hires from Ansi who work with us, and I believe we must continue to collaborate. And I believe at the European level this is similar. In France, we can also bring something to the table for other countries, and we should further develop these exchanges on the European level. And as for crisis management, well, this is crucial. So it really depends of perception also. We really have to think of the different models that are being developed. As for the development of such an approach in the gendarmerie and the way it can adapt to crises, well, cyber commandment was created not long ago. We have 7,000 gendarmes who are working in our network, and we created the cyber command, and we were able to start operating since the year 2000, and we were able to better respond to the needs of local authorities, and we're really striving to help out these local authorities. We've launched a program with the organization of the French mayors, cyber immunity. It's about being close to elected officials, helping them identify risks, helping them find ways to improve their safety architecture. And this approach allows us to develop a preventive approach. Philippe, you talked about partnerships with some corporations. And it's true, it's crucial to establish contact before the crisis at every level. A mayor or the director of his services must know who to speak to in case of cyber issues. It's the same with a CISO. He must know the contact person at the gendarmerie or in the military if he has an issue. We'll also talk about exercises. We tend to organize joint exercises. We also have Pyramid exercises with the administration. These exercises allow us to test our different interfaces. And I think it's in our interest to invite other stakeholders. We should directly involve groups, corporations, other countries at the European level in some of our exercises. During the French presidency of the Council, we'll announce such initiatives in order to ensure that these ideas take root. Earlier on, I was hesitating because I believe what I had to say was very important. Often we act because there's an external crisis. The crisis is not in our own midst. The crisis is often within a company, so it's important to understand how crisis management systems have been implemented in companies or how they have been implemented by third parties that counsel these companies. That allows us to get involved in a more fluid manner and to take part in the crisis management adequately, because we often need answers right from the onset of the crisis, and you have to think about which moment is the right moment to integrate such and such actor, and we have to be involved from the onset. We need to collect the evidence. If it's the Ansi who is involved, we have to be discussing things with them. We have to be able to elaborate a strategy together. A crisis is not about walking alone, but it's also about working in partnership. Yes, Eric, you mentioned partnerships. That is indeed crucial. We also talk about acting jointly. We talk about having collaborations with European partners. So I would like to ask you, what is the model in Luxembourg? Given what you've heard, but you also know very well the players around this table today. So what kind of specificities do you have in Luxembourg? So we don't really have a specific model. We had a very classic approach a dozen years ago. We wanted to establish a national crisis unit, the High Commissariat to National Protection. So it covers every possible crisis domain: biotechnology, chemical, nuclear. Well, we do not have any nuclear plants in Luxembourg, but we have some plants that are not far from our borders, so we try to manage this too. But we also have a cyber division, so we have emergency plans, contingency plans that have been elaborated, which are quite similar to the plans elaborated in other countries. Recently, we underwent a number of incidents, not crises, but incidents that led us to rethink this model, to update it, this contingency plan that I've been addressing. And I'd like to give you two examples. First example. So I don't remember the year 2018 or 19. There was a denial of service attack, a significant attack that hit a number of Luxembourgish infrastructures, including state infrastructures. So this was for a limited amount of time, just a number of hours. And some services were not accessible. So that was kind of a wake-up call. On the one hand, our contingency plan did not have a specific measure that would have enabled us in this specific case of the denial of service attack. Furthermore, our perception of our infrastructure was not precise enough. And we identified a number of bottlenecks in the wake of this attack. And this led us to creating a new project, an anti-denial of service project, which will emerge at the end of the year. It took us a number of years, but you know how things are in the public sector. So it was about creating a scrubbing hub, a national scrubbing hub, in order to prevent such denial of services attack. This was integrated in our crisis contingency plan as a crisis mechanism, not only for state actors, but also for critical actors of the economy who, down the line, might suffer a DDoS attack and would be unable to manage this DDoS attack with their own means. And so they would be able to request this national contingency plan. This is how we actually learned by doing, and we had to adjust our approach as time went by. And I'd like to give you another example that draws on the topic of human resources and the lack thereof. On a global level, in the wake of major incidents in the past year, mostly, and the beginning of this year, 3 to 4 of the biggest corporations in Luxembourg were targeted by ransomwares, and they were blocked for a number of weeks, some for a number of months. And this affected Luxembourg's economy. It didn't take the form of a national crisis, because these were isolated crises. However, contractors, SOC operators, different private operators on the territory came to us and told us, see, we barely managed this crisis because we do not have sufficient human resources. Our teams were strained. Shouldn't we collaborate on the national level in order to create a pool of experts, in order to exchange know-how during a crisis when we need that know-how? We're working on that model. It's integrated in the national strategy, which has been adopted a few years ago, and that runs for another couple of years. So we really want to act on the national level and make things go forward. I believe these collabs should be done at the European level also. There's a new structure called Cyber Unit that will foster bilateral cooperations. We'll have to further develop them in order to respond to cyber crises. Thank you, Pascal.
Thank you, Pascal. There are several things that you mentioned. This train saver unit that you mentioned at the beginning, and it's about intensifying European cooperation and making it more effective and efficient. And the second point, when you are affected by a crisis, these were isolated crises that could turn into a huge national crisis, and it might be Luxembourg, but it can affect any other member state. In the face of such a crisis, the different players that you are here and the member states, how can individual member states get together and come in support of Luxembourg, for instance, or another state suffering an attack? Okay, I'm going to start with your second question, which will lead me on to your first question. There are already mechanisms that Mathieu has talked about, enabling us to cooperate. The member states through the CERT EU and the NISA, with whom we have a very significant structural cooperation. We have a network enabling CERT EU and the member states to cooperate together on a voluntary basis. There's a way of going about things to be able to cooperate. So, for instance, CASER, Solar Winds, to talk to the providers to see who the victims are, to have a sort of mapping of who has been affected and how, and to cooperate on the analysis of the malware used in an attack. That's at a technical level. After that, there are other mechanisms that Mathieu might mention on the operational layers, tactical, strategic, and political layers. Before starting the roundtable, we've quite a bit of tools at our disposal from a technical point of view, but some efforts need to be made. Some players aren't at the same level as the Ansi and our EU CERT, so we're trying to bring them up to speed. And then it's the interconnection between the different layers, and that requires a bit of work for it to be effective, and it'll take time. So that has ensued from the blueprint that was announced a few years ago. Mutual support, that's what Pascal was mentioning, and in the new mandate stemming from the Cyber Security Act, there is a chapter on structural cooperation with the EU CERT. It's for the whole of the EU, focusing on the member states. We are the institutions, bodies, and of the EU. So it's about finding synergies amongst us, so that if there are major incidents, we will be able to draw upon experts to help us. With the expertise of CERT EU, well, that expertise can be provided through the NISA, because we don't have a mandate to help the member states directly. At CERT EU, we have conducted the exercise a few years ago. Ransomware, for instance, doesn't exist. We haven't had, it's not that it doesn't exist, but we haven't had any specific crises when it comes to that type of attack. What we hope is to, well, we have this pool of experts that the institutions can give to us, that we can use it, and that Pascal, Mathieu, or the Ansi, when they don't have the capacity to help us, because they're also involved, and that is why the joint cyber unit would come, where the joint cyber unit would come into play, based on the communication that was published a few months ago, and we're going to be working thick and fast in the next few months with the member states and with the EEAS, the European External Action Service, with the different units at Europol. The idea is to create this unit, a virtual and actual platform enabling actors or players to come together to share information, help each other, and manage major crises in an atmosphere of trust. The major challenge, one of the major challenges of this platform, I believe, is how can we speak a common language between the civilian community that I represent, the diplomatic community represented by EEAS, law enforcement community through Europol, because we don't have the same mechanism in the civilian world. We have to act as fast as possible, communicate to people, share information. Sometimes you have to be prudent if it affects the armed services. So that is something that we wish to address collectively, along with all our partners. Of course, that's why it's so important that these practical exercises take place. It's important that all the stakeholders in the ecosystems get together to get to know each other's areas and to understand each other so that they can act swiftly when the time comes. Mathieu might talk about this, and in the subsequent discussion, if possible, is we're talking about crisis management. But the best thing is for there to be no crisis at all. How do we see to it that that happens? Pascal, Eric talked about human resources. They're very important. Training, recruiting, etc. But it's throwing money at the problem, is it not? Well, to EU CERT it's expensive, but you're investing in tools and humans. I prefer investing in the latter. So you're investing in tools, processes, humans. It's money. But if we had a static image and we'd say, this is the perimeter that requires defending, and we need X amount of money. But that's changing and growing. And especially with the pandemic, the area of attack has increased. We can recruit all we want, but it won't be enough. Even the attackers have changed so much. If you just look at what we characterize, we don't attribute, but if you look at the providers of trade intelligence, there's several of them. We have group that are unidentified because the maps are being blurred and attackers are so good and professionals. We're flabbergasted at how sophisticated they are. We even say to each other, how could they have accomplished such a feat, and what tools is at their disposal? So we have to see to it that there's no crisis at all, because no amount of resources will be enough. Yes, well, what you're trying to say is inspire ourselves from their model, because you always can learn from your enemy. Never underestimate your enemy. It's not the General de Maintenon that will contradict me. You mentioned the different roles that the Ansi plays on this subject. We talked about the coordination actions, the different links that you have with the players around the table. Assad talked about the different layers, technological, strategic, political. How does the Ansi interact with all these layers? And what can the Ansi do in order to render the linkages and these different levels and layers more fluid? Well, I'll try to be brief in my answer. As Assad was saying, we have this blueprint at a European level, at 3 levels, technical, strategic, and political. I won't talk about the technical level. We talked about it, EU CERT. We have the Cyclone cooperation network created at the end of 2020, which brings together representatives from the member states at executive level and also officers that will help do the groundwork in this network. The network is there to share on the effects of a threat or a major incident and to learn to trust each other and coordinate amongst each other. I think it's important. Those two aspects are important in order to act more swiftly once that network needs to be activated. It's a very new network. It was created 2 years ago. We first focused on the activation of internal processes, thresholds. We worked on the cooperation with the EU CERT network, and the next meeting of the executives will take place in Bucharest at the end of the year. Ansi has liaison offers within the EU CERT network and the Cyclone network to carry the information forward on intelligence, on the impact of a crisis and incident, and to help foster a dialogue, and especially to have a shared vision of the situation. It's important that there be this single vision in order to feed that into the political level we were talking about earlier on. And the agency plays a specific role at state level. The state has its own way of dealing with crises, major crises, with government plans. We have a commissariat as well, and cyber crises are part of it as well. Managing a cyber crisis is also managing a crisis with specificities, and the effects thereof are not necessarily in the cyber world. They have an effect on the people working in a system that's been compromised. So we have this paranet for the measures to support state action in the event of a major cyber crisis. So we have a liaison functioned in order to provide knowledge and support and to help better grasp the threat. We're there to help manage the crisis and its effect. Our role is to try and help people understand the attack, and we do so at a state and European level. Mathieu, would you like to add something? Yes. Sad was talking about CERT EU and the important role, and the unit, sorry, the new unit. Of course, there's a huge human resources problem and a lack of expertise. Let us not forget that everybody's involved in managing crisis. Cyber experts must be on board, but all other people must be aware of the fact that a cyber crisis can be long and technical, etc. Another player who's important is industry. Because there's a lack of skills in the member states, because the member states are at their wits' end, really. This unit will bring some hope, and we also have to work hand in hand with industry at a European level, with service providers that will help build partnerships and build trust so that we can get to know each other, render relations more fluid and flowy. Now, this cooperation issue is absolutely key. Sharing information is vital in this cyber world that knows no boundaries. And in certain ecosystems and universes, sharing information may have its limitations, and we understand full well why. How can we reinforce these forms of cooperation, all the while bearing in mind that a balance needs to be struck? We have players, stakeholders at multilateral, multinational level. NATO and the UN are doing a lot on this matter. Can we talk about NATO first? Yes. As you were saying very correctly, the sharing of information on the cyber threat and the difficult to agree on a vision because this affects political policy, the policy area, and unfortunately we don't have the same vision. Not every member state has the same vision on what priorities to use to deal with an opponent. But we in France, we really want to cooperate at an international level. And we won't be able to go it alone, because it makes no sense to know a threat without cooperation. We're based on bilateral cooperation. We have identified subjects of common interest with our partners. We have good, satisfactory partnerships. We've had joint operations. We've been able to foil attacks thanks to our partnerships at a bilateral level. We always start talking about the threat and then about subjects for operational or technical cooperation. We also want international organizations to play their role. The UN is not a military forum, but it is one to regulate cyberspace, and we are supporting the government experts who are trying to do some international legal work to define cyber threats. And NATO has fewer external operations than it did a decade ago. It is trying to redefine its role and the order in which it wishes to deal with the priorities of the member states and the alliance. But cybersecurity is at the top of the agenda. The organization has suffered serious attacks, which have been a wake-up call, and NATO is looking at offensive cyber tools and France was one of the first few states that revealed that it has offensive capacity and it would be ready to use them in the framework of NATO. These are subjects we're trying to make some headway on. It's slow, but we're not putting any obstacles before us. The European Union, and now it's probably time to talk about the presidency in office of the European Union from a military point of view. Little progress has been made on cyber defense cooperation. However, there are some positive signals by the general staff of the European Union states, and they are perfectly in line with the 3 priorities that we're proposing in the French presidency. The first is to agree on a cyber defensive doctrine. You can imagine big volumes of work on wars that will never take place. Nevertheless, we have to agree on the terms, the terminology we use with our other partners in the European Union. And this is something that is ongoing and that is being steered by the General Staff of the European Union. We have to develop common capacities. That's our second priority. There's the idea of developing tools, and we also have a German project that has European funding and a place where we're going to be able to exchange information with respect to the military threat. And we also try to support the idea of tools enabling for command and control that is cyber-proof. So when we want to exchange information, we face 2 problems with the partner. One is a political partner. Do we agree on what we want to share? And the second one, what information system should we be communicating on? We can't talk to all of our partners at once, the Portuguese, the Estonians, etc. And we hope that the European Union can equip itself with an information system for classified information. The third priority is the interconnection of the European military certs. That is being led by the European Defence Agency. And it's showing some promising. So that is what France is going to be supporting in terms of its military priorities during its presidency. And we also really carry on with the initiatives started by Germany and Slovenia thereafter.
Thank you, General. So how do you cooperate with, which structures do you cooperate? Maybe some of the structures that are around the table here today. So I'd like to address the military aspect first and foremost. On the military level, Luxembourg is a small country and has a small army. We often say that we have the biggest cathedral in the world because the whole of our army can actually be in the cathedral at the same time. So we are cooperating with other countries, notably Belgium. Recently, we have been collaborating on very specific topics with Belgium. Not cyber, but just on military topics. We have an A400M Airbus that we share between Belgium and Luxembourg. As for the cyberspace, well, we have similar collaborations. So we are naturally highly reliant on the large countries that surround us, France and Germany also. This need for cooperation is very high. And we're trying to follow up closely on all these European collaboration initiatives in order to be a part of these initiatives from the onset and to leverage any possible opportunity. We also try to bring something to the table for these activities. On the cyber level, we were able to bring a number of things to the table, such as in the CyCert network. As for information exchange, we were able to really progress this element, able to deploy effective information exchange, notably with NATO. So we have a number of tools that are availability in order to rapidly access data or analysis that have already been carried out. Thanks to this, we also are able to quickly collaborate or respond to an issue, because in that case we'll have all the available information at hand and we'll be able to specifically deploy the expertise that is lacking. So this is a very technical approach. We talking about threat data, compromise indicators. So these are different number of layers that can then end up on platforms such as the GCU, and that will allow us to identify the proper resources at the adequate moment in order to respond. In the cyber world, you have to be fast. You have to be able to identify the shortcomings in terms of expertise. And you have to be able to identify the people that can support you in order to mitigate this crisis or manage this crisis or remain on top of the crisis. Thank you, Pascal. We could maybe talk about the exercises that we are currently preparing. Exercises that could be deployed in 2022 with the French presidency of the Council. Are we going to carry out French exercises, European exercises, bringing together the gendarmerie, the army, corporations, geopolitical experts, European countries? We are aware that communication is crucial. This is one of the pillars of resilience. Mathieu addressed it earlier. Have we already thought about an exercise that could integrate all these dimensions? Mathieu, this is for you.
Merci Mélanie. Donc en fait, dans le cadre de la PFUE, l'Ansi travaille en très étroite collaboration avec le...
The Ansi works closely with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the Defense Ministry. We focus on mutual solidarity and mutual support in case of a serious incident. We've already implicitly addressed this. And we want to foster collaboration, and we believe that the PFUE is a fantastic moment to do such collaboration. We have made a lot of efforts in order to foster such collaboration. So We do not have a final date, but during this PFUE, we will look at articulating the technical, the strategic, and the political level. The stakes are huge. We'll be able to test many different elements. We will be able to draw many lessons. We also have to take into account that this collaboration should be one of the cornerstones of our future approach. Eric, at the Gendarmerie, you are also thinking about such exercises. Indeed, two elements I'd like to pick up on. On the national level, it's crucial to organize such exercises in order to adapt ourselves. We've just thought about a national center for operations, and we're trying to review the way we organize command in the cyberspace. So we will be proposing crisis management exercises that draw on existing models, and we will also take part in the exercises brought up by Mathieu as much as we can. However, at the European level, from a police standpoint, the situation is rather different indeed. We have information exchange tools. This was what Philippe said. We have tools at Europol, we have the legal framework, we have operational tools in order to directly exchange information, including during operations. We've seen this during the EncroChat operation. We have the capability of exchanging live evidence that has been collected and then leveraging it together in the different member states, and this is a true upside. We don't have joint crisis exercises, but we have operations that do look like that. We have the EncroChat operation that is a lasting tool. We have 25 people from across Europe, with 9 people located in La Haye full-time. But this operation was launched in April last year, and we still have a cell over there. So we have to be able to really hold on. So these crises lead to big police operations, and in Europe we are capable of carrying them out and supporting the stakeholders. If we had another SolarWinds, it's crucial that the judicial and police institutions be involved right from the onset. And I believe this is what we're lacking. We are not entirely capable of triggering some elements, but we have the tools. So I believe some things could be done at the European level, including with the judiciary. We have Eurojust, who increasingly manages prosecutions at the European level, and it's the prosecutors gathered in Eurojust that bring together joint investigation teams. They're trying to manage crises. They are currently operational, and we've had prosecutors on the phone at 2 in the morning to make decisions and green light arrests. Thanks to the experience that is ours in the judicial and police world, we have proper capabilities to play our part. Thank you very much, Eric. I'd like to leave a bit of time for questions and answers. I would just like to talk about resilience. We cannot talk about crises without talking about resilience. So we're aware that everything goes very fast. You need financial means, human resources, technologies. How can we better organize resilience? Sad, what could we do? As I said earlier, the best way to manage a crisis is to not have a crisis. Then it's about drawing lessons and moving forward together. I've been in the business for 23 years. I've been told you have to patch, follow good practices. This is apparently insufficient because this attack surface is growing and we're still being attacked. And people are also growing wary of the issues they are finding. As a user, I am bound by some obligations. I must update my systems. I must use them adequately. It's not about having a driving license, but it's about, knowing how to set up my systems. It's about ensuring that my softwares, my systems are as safe as possible. What's the equivalent for the provider? What does a provider do? What does a safety software provider do? Let's take Fortinet. I just read there was a new vulnerability on VPNs, which does something to passwords that might seem practical to the user, but that is very interesting for attackers. So if we have such passwords that are used for critical infrastructures, well, I believe providers should be held accountable. They should be held accountable and they should foster better practices. So I believe it is high time to think about my duties as a user, but also the duties of a provider towards the software that he provides me. It's also important to think about the necessary time that allows us to digest a crisis and to draw the lessons before we have to face the next crisis. So I believe we're just going from one crisis to another and we don't have the time to draw the lessons. So once again, it's about human resources. This is a resource that is not acknowledged enough. We're talking about personnel we have to recruit, but we also need to provide good working conditions for this personnel managing cyber crises. We must also be aware about psychological outcomes. I have a colleague that talks about a crisis that took 1 year to get over. And it's true, this isn't often mentioned, the burnout aspect of things, and you have to really take this into account. Would you like to add something, Matthew? I know that it's important for the Ansi, but I know this is also taken into account in the military and for the gendarmerie. I believe that this also ties into the support we provide to our beneficiaries. As you fully know, the agency loves to publish reports and guidelines. So we do take this aspect into account, and the agency at the end of the year has published cyber guidelines for crisis management. On top of this, the agency also is active in a number of university circles in order to train the future managers and to raise awareness on cyber responsibilities, but also to raise awareness about the human factor. Indeed, some individuals are often not confronted with that aspect, so it's important to take this into account at every different level. So we can take a couple of questions because we still have some time, which is quite a nice thing. Let's lighten up the room. You just have to raise your hand if you want to ask a question. I see there's a question over there.
Bonjour.
Hello, I'm Louise Offray. I'm a student at the École Nationale de l'Administration, the ENA. I'd just like to ask you on a regulatory aspect. We talked about the prevention dimension. To what extent were they, the prefects, etc., involved in the crisis management plans? We mentioned the Pyronet one. Well, I'd like to answer that. At that level, at the département level, it is the prefects, the préfets that have the responsibility. They are going to play a specific role in managing the crisis. There's still work to be done on the full incorporation of the cyber element in this scheme. Everybody's working on it. Joint exercises are being conducted to work on that and fully incorporate this area. That is very new at that level, and the gendarmerie is also working on it. Yes. When it comes to preparation, there's one crisis in particular. We called it the evacuation of Notre-Dame-des-Landes, which was a huge operation, and that was under the leadership of the département's prefects that was in charge. And then there was a cyber dimension as well that was important for us. The first was to protect our information and communication systems and what was being said on social media, and our capacity to detect movements, a bit like what Philippe has mentioned on operation theatres, which are important to bear in mind. And these were explained to Madame Prefect, and we changed it a bit. So it's important to identify who's in charge of managing the crisis, who's going to take the decisions, and we're going to have to do that in the exercises that we're going to undertake. I must admit, I have difficulty imagining purely cyber crisis situations where it would only be about a local community, local authority, or a local prefecture. And we haven't done enough by way of flanking them during a crisis. And Ansi did flank certain bigger local authorities that have been affected over the past few years. And it would be worthwhile including them in these large-scale crisis exercises. There's an association being created, the National Association of Cybersecurity Resilience in the different territories, and that will help us. And the gendarmerie will be on board from the outset of the project, and that's very important to prepare for the future. Your question was very relevant indeed, and it's definitely a subject we're pondering and that we still have a lot of work to do on. Yes, you talked about preparing a crisis, and one of the main tools is the exercise. And in Luxembourg, we have worked on this concept of exercise, and to reduce it to one single entity to flank companies in conducting an exercise that is specific to their situation and to simulate a crisis situation to prepare for a future crisis, and we anticipate the crisis. In 2017, we created a crisis simulator where we welcome a team from a company, and for a day we let them go through a series of incidents to which they have to react, and then there's a debriefing session in order to help them, support them, and to help them prepare their new crisis management plan. This is a very important stage, and it's often seen under the angle of international cooperation, but I think that this is something that we can implement within a company, a group, a local authority. At any rate, that's what we've tried to do in Luxembourg. Are there any other questions, which will be the last in our session? There's a man here, the gentleman right in front of you, at the very end of the room. Well, as we await the question, bit of advertising, we have a guide that was published in English during the FIC. So there's a detailed chronogram for any organization to conduct a crisis anticipation exercise. I'm Nicolas Marinet. I'm a student on cyber security in Paris. So what about the shield that was set up in Luxembourg? Is there a French equivalent? Can we pool the expertise? Can we not develop such a form of protection at a European level? Sad, over to you. This one's for you, Sad. Am I a joker? I can't answer you for France. Even though I'm French, from an EU point of view. Within the sister network, every member state CERT-EU has mechanisms. It's not a shield so much, because as you know, every institution and our body are autonomous and independent. We cannot impose something upon them. But we have a role much like Ansi's in supporting them in the types of solutions they should use. It might seem weird to you. There are attacks by denial of service, but they're rare. There are mechanisms in place. I do not think they're as developed as Pascal was talking about for Luxembourg. It's not the type of menace that causes us to lose sleep. Well, it can be quite flattering for an activist when they don't agree with an EU policy to close down a Commission website, but it doesn't tend to last very long. And in our threat analysis, we haven't spotted a real threat or a real need to increase existing capacities, because the type of threats are not the same. They're not the same significance as that type of threat to an individual member state. With respect to what Saad has said, and the first part of what he said, and Mathieu will complement what I said, there are commercial offers on the market, and the role of the Ansi, our advisors there, is to advise on solutions that can be used And we have a solution on this market that we use to protect our networks. The question is to know how to protect a small SME that is going to fall prey to an attack, or several SMEs that fall prey to a simultaneous attack. There are several solutions on the market. Are they accessible? Are they known? Does a person managing an e-commerce platform, are they aware of what they can set up? And of course, then the question of hosts. There's Scaleway, Orange, several of them are present at the forum. They all have solutions that are tweaked to this type of risk. They deal with this on a daily basis, this type of risk. I don't entirely agree with the second part of what Sad has said. We've had attacks on DDoS attacks on institutions that were there to veil another type of attack. This is a risk to us that needs to be taken into account, not because of its immediate effects, but what might lurk behind it, and what, in respect of what the attacker's intentions are. There are things that can be replicated, that are done in a member state and that can be transposed to a European level, and some things that are difficult to imagine can be done at a European level. Nevertheless, there are global solutions that exist to protect oneself against risks. The DNS, domain name resolution services, that protect users from going to websites that disseminate malware. We can imagine a systemic solutions, but not single solutions. Now, to go to the end of my line of reasoning, one might imagine that some areas of France might set up this type of solutions, especially more faraway territories, the faraway départements, where service denial attacks might have an impact on different parts of their networks because there are only 4 or 5 entry points to their territory. So an access or service denial attacks on several companies in the Réunion, for instance, might have a bearing on lots of people on the island and present as a systemic risk. Okay.
Parfait. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. There's no Ansi guide on anti-denial of service. That's your mission for 2022 if you accept it. And I'm sure that will also be addressed in the report of the FIG. Thank you for being with us. Thank you for sharing your expertise. And tomorrow we'll keep the debate alive. Thanks to each and everyone. Goodbye.